And a top focus on WION at this hour. Tens of thousands of Israelis poured into the streets of cities across the country on Sunday night after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu abruptly fired his defense minister for challenging the Israeli leader's judicial overhaul plan. Scores of demonstrators in Tel Aviv blocked a main highway and also lit bonfires. The drone footage also showed demonstrators waving blue and white Israeli flags and raising slogans against the judicial overhaul bill. The police also fired water cannons to forcefully remove the demonstrators who refused to leave the main highway.
We served 4 years in the army, 3 years. Everyone here served in the army, and they are serving too. And we are going to protect the democracy. We are here for the democracy. Bibi is not here for the democracy. Thank you very much.
We're here to protest. We feel that we have no other way. We have to speak. We have to show ourselves and say, this is it. Up here. This has to be stopped. This Prime Minister is not qualified anymore.
Now, similar scenes were also witnessed outside Prime Minister Netanyahu's residence in Jerusalem, where the police officials used water cannons to disperse the demonstrators. Now, the government's plan to increase its control over the judiciary has triggered a national crisis in the country and sparked the largest protest movement in Israeli history. Netanyahu's government is pushing ahead for a parliamentary vote this week on a centerpiece of the overhaul, a law that would give the governing coalition the final say over all judicial appointments. However, Israel's former defense minister on Saturday called for an immediate halt to the far-right government's contentious plan to overhaul the country's judiciary. The now-sacked minister said that the plan has stirred turmoil within Israel's military and it also posed a threat to the country's security.
למען ביטחון ישראל, למען בנותינו ובנינו. צריך לעצור בעת הזו את תהליך החקיקה, לאפשר לעם ישראל לחגוג יחד את חג הפסח ואת יום העצמאות, ולהתאבל יחד ביום הזיכרון וביום השואה. אלו ימים קדושים עבורנו.
Now, Israel's Consul General in New York, Asif Zamir, also announced his resignation on Sunday in protest over Netanyahu's firing of the defense minister. Taking to Twitter, Zamir wrote, and I'm quoting here, "Today's dangerous decision to fire the Minister of Defense convinced me that I can no longer continue representing this government. I believe it is my duty to ensure that Israel remains a beacon of democracy and freedom in the world." Meanwhile, amid the unprecedented demonstrations in the country that erupted hours after the defense minister's sacking, several Likud lawmakers and ministers also joined the call to stop the legislative process of Netanyahu's judicial overhaul. According to reports, Netanyahu's top minister and ally, Aryeh Deri, expressed support for halting the process. Meanwhile, the country's economy minister also issued a statement which appears to assume that Netanyahu will halt the judicial overhaul legislation. The economy minister further said that if this happens, he will support Netanyahu in doing so. According to reports, Netanyahu is considering halting the judicial overhaul reform. Reports further suggest that he might pause the judicial overhaul plan soon. Meanwhile, the coalition party leaders are reportedly scheduled to meet in the morning. The United States of America has further expressed deep concern over the events taking place in Israel, further underscoring the urgent need for a compromise.
This week, my administration released
For more on this, we're now being joined by Alan Burstyn, who is a professor at the Department of Political Science at the University of California. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
Now, there are massive demonstrations taking place in Israel. People have come out on the streets sloganeering against the judicial reform bill, especially after the sacking of the defense minister. And reports also suggest that several Likud lawmakers have also joined the call to stop the judicial overhaul. But the bigger question that arises here is that will Netanyahu halt the judicial reform bill?
It's a very good question. No one really knows what Netanyahu is going to do. No one would have predicted when this government was formed almost exactly 3 months ago, No one would have predicted that Netanyahu, who is somewhat of a political wizard, would lose control so quickly. He's really being pulled by different elements in his coalition. There are very hawkish right-wing elements that are pushing him to continue with his reforms. There are more moderate elements, former Minister Gallant was one of them, who are pushing him to halt the reforms. And Netanyahu himself is embroiled in court on trials of bribery and corruption, and he has his own interest in these reforms. So he would very much like to see them go forth for his own sort of political and personal interests, but he's really being pulled from all sides, and he seemingly has lost control over what his government is doing. His Minister of Justice is threatening that if he halts the reforms, he will resign. In turn, other people in his government are saying if you don't halt the reforms, the military is going to fall apart. And he is really sort of between a rock and a hard place, while also facing criminal charges himself and trying to change the system in order to ease his trial. So it's unclear where he's going to go, but I don't envy him trying to weasel his way out of this one, to be honest.
Right, Professor, just to follow up to that, despite so much happening in Israel, why is Netanyahu so persistent regarding this bill? What is at stake for him?
So personally, because he is on trial for charges of breach of trust and corruption, he has an interest in the coalition under his power having more of an influence over the nomination of judges, because there are 3 Supreme Court judges who are due to be nominated in the next several years, and he might be able to nominate judges who might be lenient on him later on. In turn, his coalition is also made up of very hawkish right-wing elements who have, over the years, tried to push forth a lot of legislation and expansion of settlements and military operations that the Supreme Court in Israel has often restrained the military's activity, and they have their own interests in pushing forth these bills and these reforms in order to say the Supreme Court basically will no longer be able to serve as a check and balance on the government. So there's sort of a coming together of different elements within the coalition that all agree that they would like to influence the Supreme Court and restrain it. And that's why they're pushing forth this so strongly. I don't think that they anticipated at all the response of the people to this. And that has really caught them by surprise. And right now they're constantly trying to put out fires here and there in order to just keep the peace. But so far they have refused any attempt at negotiations, such as was put forth by the president of Israel. And they have said they're not going to ease up on the bill at all because each of them have their interests. But right now, I think that they're realizing they may have no choice in light of this spontaneous demonstration that popped up yesterday.
Right, Professor. Also, is Netanyahu running out of options at the moment? Can he push through this bill given the scale of the demonstrations in the country?
So technically, his government still has a majority. The coalition has a 64 out of 120 majority. So even if 1 or 2 or 3 different members of the coalition do not vote with the coalition, they can still push this through. He has the political power to do it. There is a question, though, of is he willing to actually see it through in light of the fact that the country is increasingly showing signs of destabilizing, and people are already talking about not so much civil war, but maybe civil rivalry. And this latest move of firing the Minister of Defense really, I think, was a tactical mistake, because one of the things that are seen in Israel as almost a holy grail is the sanctity of the military. The military and the security establishment is supposed to be above politics, and it's supposed to be something that everyone in the country can agree is essential for the country's defense. And the fact that there are more and more soldiers in reserve duty that are saying they're not going to report to their duty in light of these reforms, and in turn the Minister of Defense tried to warn against this and was fired because of it, I think is causing a major backlash right now.
Right. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us on WION and sharing your insights with us. Thanks very much.
Thank you.